He built an empire that never slept, and when the year finally ended, he realized he had nowhere to come home to. The front gate rolled open with its usual smooth obedience. The security lights swept across the driveway, bright as a stage. The car's tires whispered over gravel, past the manicured hedges and the bare winter trees wrapped in soft white lights. Jonathan Hale watched the house appear the way it always did. Perfect, expensive, calm. A place designed to impress strangers. His driver Victor glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Want me to wait?" Jonathan checked his phone. 12:17 a.m., New Year's Day. No missed calls, no new messages, not even the automated Happy New Year email from the board, because he'd already read it at the hotel bar between negotiations and a handshake that should have felt like a win. "No," he said. His voice sounded flatter than he meant it to. "Go home. Happy New Year." Victor hesitated, then nodded. "Happy New Year, sir." Jonathan stepped out into cold air that smelled faintly of pine and wet stone. The night was quiet enough that he could hear the distant hum of the highway. Somewhere far off, fireworks crackled like a memory. He walked up the steps, briefcase in hand, and entered the code without thinking. The lock clicked. The door opened. Warm air spilled over him. The foyer lights were on, set to their evening glow. A tasteful wreath hung on the inside door because Eleanor insisted on tradition, even when she no longer insisted on much else. Jonathan waited for the sound of footsteps, for the soft call of his name, for anything, nothing, no music, no laughter, no lingering party noise. The house didn't even feel asleep. It felt paused. He set his briefcase down on the entry table beside a bowl of keys he hadn't used in years. His shoulders ached when the silence made room for his body again. The tension that carried him through meetings and airports and polished conference rooms slipped just slightly, and in the slip he felt something like dread. He loosened his tie and listened. A clock ticked somewhere, steady and indifferent. The living room was dim, lit by the glow of the Christmas tree Eleanor hadn't taken down yet. The ornaments were the same ones they'd used for decades. Glass globes, silver ribbons, a few handmade ones their daughter had made in elementary school, a popsicle stick reindeer, a lopsided angel. Jonathan walked closer, drawn by the small familiarity. On the mantel, New Year's cards sat arranged like polite witnesses, the kind you send when you've lost the habit of calling. The family photo in the centre showed Eleanor and him at a charity gala last spring. They were smiling, bodies angled toward the camera, not toward each other. He reached out and touched the frame. It was cold. The kitchen lights were off. The house staff had clearly gone home. That was normal. Eleanor had insisted on giving them the week between Christmas and New Year's, long before generosity became a tax strategy in his world. He moved through the hallway, footsteps muffled by expensive rugs. He passed the closed door of the office, the gym, the guest suite they never used. He paused outside Eleanor's door. He didn't knock. He hadn't knocked in years. He'd gotten into the habit of living around her schedules the way he lived around everything else, efficiently, quietly, without collision. Jonathan put his hand on the doorknob. The door was unlocked. He opened it a few inches. The room was dark, except for the pale wash of streetlight through the curtains. The bed was neatly made, untouched. The pillows were lined up with crisp precision. No book on the nightstand, no charging phone, no glasses. She wasn't there. He shut the door gently and stood in the hallway, suddenly aware of the cold seeping from the floor into his feet. Eleanor had her own space now, a guest room at the back of the house. That had started as a just-for-a-while arrangement after his late flights disrupted her sleep. Then it became normal. Then it became permanent, without either of them ever declaring it. Jonathan walked toward the back hall. His reflection followed him in framed pictures and polished glass. A man with careful posture, silver at his temples, a suit that fit perfectly. A man who looked like he belonged to a life that made sense. At the guest room door, he hesitated. He knocked once, softly, almost as if he was afraid of the sound. No answer. He knocked again. "Eleanor?" A shift, a quiet rustle. Then the door opened. Eleanor stood there in a soft robe, hair loose, her face makeup free. She looked tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep. It came from years of holding herself still. Her eyes moved over him, taking in the suit, the loosened tie, the faint line between his brows. She didn't smile. "You're home," she said, like she was confirming a fact. The meeting ran late, he said. The flight got in after midnight. She nodded once. I saw the car lights. Jonathan swallowed. In the distance, a firework popped, faint and lonely. Happy New Year, he offered. Her gaze flicked toward the hallway behind him, as if she expected someone else to step into view. Someone he might have brought home from the city. Someone he might have become without noticing. Happy New Year, she repeated, but it didn't land like an exchange. It was more like a ritual they both remembered how to perform. Jonathan shifted his weight. Were you waiting up? Eleanor's mouth tightened just slightly. No. That one syllable hit him harder than it should have. He forced a small laugh that didn't sound like him. Right? Of course. It's late. Eleanor's eyes softened for a moment, then retreated. I assumed you'd be in Chicago until tomorrow. It changed, he said. I didn't. He stopped himself. I didn't tell you. The words felt childish in his mouth, like confessing he forgot his homework. Eleanor studied him, and something unspoken passed between them, familiar as old pain. How was it? She asked, and Jonathan knew she didn't mean the flight. He thought of the conference room with its glass walls and skyline view, the applause after the signing, the congratulatory handshakes, the expensive whiskey. He thought of standing there smiling while his phone stayed silent in his pocket. It was fine, he said. Eleanor gave a slow nod, as if she'd expected that answer because she'd heard it for years. A quiet settled between them. Jonathan realized he could hear the heater kicking on, the faint creak of the house adjusting to cold. The sound made the silence feel even more complete, like the building itself was breathing while they forgot how. Did you eat? She asked. Not really. I made lentil soup earlier, she said. It's probably still good. He blinked. The idea of Eleanor cooking, really cooking, not directing staff, felt like a rare glimpse of something older, something that used to be theirs. Sundays in the old house, flour on her hands, music playing while she sang off-key on purpose. You cooked? He asked before he could stop him. Eleanor's face didn't change, but her eyes did, a flicker, a guarded light. It helps me sleep, she said. Sometimes. Jonathan nodded slowly. I'd like some. Eleanor hesitated. For a moment, Jonathan thought she might say no, not out of cruelty, out of habit, out of the careful boundaries they'd built to avoid disappointment. Then she stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in, just for a minute. Her room was simple, warm. A small lamp on the dresser cast a soft gold pool across the bedspread. On the nightstand sat a book with a worn spine and a pair of reading glasses. The air smelled faintly of lavender lotion and paper. It smelled like a life. Jonathan stood awkwardly near the doorway, unsure where his hands belonged. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals with less discomfort than this. Eleanor walked past him and down the hallway. Jonathan followed, and the simple fact of following her into the kitchen, into the heart of the house, felt strangely intimate. The kitchen light clicked on, bright and honest. It revealed what the foyer and living room had hidden. A few dishes stacked neatly in the sink, a drying towel on the counter, a pot on the stove. Eleanor moved without looking at him, taking out 2 bowls. 2. Jonathan watched her as if she were someone he used to know. You didn't have to make 2, he said quietly. Eleanor paused, ladle hovering over the pot. For a moment, her shoulders rose with an inhale and fell with something like resignation. I didn't, she said. I just did. Jonathan's throat tightened. He stepped closer, not all the way, but enough to feel the warmth of the stove. Enough to see the small lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there when they married. Lines earned, not given. Eleanor poured soup into the bowls. Steam rose in soft curls. She set one down in front of him. Their hands almost touched. Almost. Jonathan felt the near contact like a pulse. Outside, another distant firework bloomed and died. The window reflected the 2 of them standing under the kitchen light, a couple framed by granite counters and stainless steel appliances, dressed in a suit and a robe like costumes from different lives. Jonathan lowered himself into a chair at the island. Eleanor sat across from him, not beside him. Still, it was closer than they'd been in weeks. He tasted the soup. It was good, simple, real. This is great, he said. Eleanor gave a small, non-committal hum, stirring her bowl with a spoon she didn't lift to her mouth. Jonathan watched her fingers, the way her ring caught the light when she moved. The same ring he'd slid onto her hand when he was 26 and broke, and wildly sure he could give her the world. He had given her the world, just not himself. "Eleanor," he said, and his voice sounded careful, as if he were approaching something fragile. She looked up. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them, something that made his chest tighten again. Not anger, not even sadness, weariness. He tried to find the right words, the kind that worked in boardrooms and press releases. None of them belonged here. "I don't want this year to be like the last one," he said finally. Eleanor's gaze held his. The kitchen was so quiet he could hear the soft click of the spoon against the bowl. Then she set the spoon down. "Jonathan," she said, her voice low, controlled, almost gentle, "you came home because your schedule changed, not because you chose to." He flinched, but he didn't deny it. The truth sat between them like a third bowl. Eleanor stood and walked to the counter, reaching for something near the coffee machine. Her robe sleeve slipped back slightly, revealing her wrist. Jonathan noticed a thin envelope on the counter he hadn't seen before. His name was written on it, not in printed letters, in Eleanor's handwriting. He stared at it as if it might disappear if he looked away. Eleanor didn't pick it up. She didn't hand it to him. She just stood there with her back half turned, breathing quietly, like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long and had finally set it down. Jonathan's mouth went dry. "What's that?" he asked, though he already felt the answer forming in the silence. Eleanor didn't look at him right away. When she did, her expression was calm in a way that scared him. "It's something I should have given you a long time ago," she said. Jonathan's hand moved toward the envelope, stopping inches short. And in the bright, ordinary kitchen of the house he'd paid for, he wondered what could possibly be inside that would make the new year feel like an ending instead of a beginning. Morning came softly, without ceremony. Grey light pressed against the kitchen windows, flattening the world into quiet shapes. The Christmas tree lights were still on, their glow pale and tired, like they'd stayed up too late and regretted it. Jonathan woke in the guest room. It took him a few seconds to remember why the ceiling looked unfamiliar. The bed was comfortable but impersonal. No indentation where Eleanor usually slept. No scent of her shampoo on the pillow, just clean linen and the faint hum of the heater clicking on and off. He lay still, listening. The house was awake. He could hear movement downstairs, cups clinking, a drawer opening, the low murmur of the radio set to a news station Eleanor liked in the mornings. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent, ordinary sounds. For reasons he couldn't quite name, they unsettled him. Jonathan sat up and ran a hand over his face. His suit from the night before hung neatly over the chair as if someone had taken care not to wrinkle it. Eleanor's doing, he realized. She still noticed things like that. He changed slowly, choosing a sweater instead of a jacket. When he opened the door, the hallway smelled faintly of coffee. He followed the scent. Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter, back to him, wearing a soft grey sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot. She looked smaller in daylight, although more real. She didn't turn when he entered. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," she replied evenly. 2 mugs sat on the counter. Steam rose from both. Jonathan paused. The sight felt deliberate. He moved closer, careful not to crowd her, and took one of the mugs. Their fingers brushed briefly. Eleanor didn't pull away, but she didn't linger either. They stood side by side in silence, looking out the window at the bare trees and frost-tipped lawn. The radio murmured something about the markets opening strong. Jonathan almost laughed. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Enough," she said. "You?" He hesitated. "Yes." It wasn't exactly true, but neither was lying. He'd slept in pieces, drifting in and out, waking with the sense that something important was waiting just beyond reach. Eleanor took a sip of coffee, then leaned against the counter. Jonathan noticed she kept a small distance between them, the way you do with someone you respect, but don't fully trust. "How long have you been up?" he asked. "Since 6. "Old habits," he said, attempting a smile. She glanced at him, then away. Some habits don't leave. They moved to the small table near the window. Not the formal dining room, not the island where business conversations sometimes spilled into breakfast. The small table they'd once used every day. They sat across from each other. Jonathan wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth sink into his palms. Eleanor folded hers neatly, fingers interlaced. The envelope from last night was gone. He tried not to look around for it. Tried not to think about how carefully she'd placed it on the counter, as if she'd wanted him to see it but not touch it yet. "You're not flying out today?" she asked. "No," he said. "I cleared the morning. Maybe the day." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, a reflex. She caught herself and smoothed her expression. "That's unexpected." "So was being home at midnight," he said. A faint, almost smile crossed her face and disappeared. They drank their coffee. The silence wasn't hostile, but it wasn't easy either. It felt practiced, like something they'd both learned to navigate without incident. Jonathan cleared his throat. "I realized something last night." Eleanor didn't look up. "Did you?" "I don't remember the last New Year's morning we spent like this." She finally met his eyes. "I do." He waited. "It was 8 years ago," she said. "You left before noon." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Jonathan nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." Eleanor studied him, searching for something. He wondered how many apologies she'd heard over the years, how many had turned into nothing. "I know you are," she said. "You usually are." That landed harder than anger ever could have. Jonathan shifted in his chair. "I'm trying not to say the wrong thing," she gave a small exhale. "You don't have to say anything right now." "But I want to," he said. "That's the problem. I want to fix it, and I don't know where to start." Eleanor's gaze softened just a little. "That's because it didn't break all at once." He looked down at his coffee. "I thought providing was enough." "It was," she said, "until it wasn't." The radio switched to a commercial. Someone laughed too loudly about a sale ending soon. Jonathan stood abruptly. The chair scraped softly against the floor. "I'll turn that off," he said, gesturing toward the radio. He reached for the dial and twisted it until the kitchen fell quiet again. When he turned back, Eleanor was watching him. "You always do that," she said. "Do what?" "Fix the noise," she said. "You remove obstacles, silence distractions." He nodded. "It's what I'm good at." "Yes," she said, "just not the ones that mattered." They stood there, the space between them filled with things neither had said for years. Jonathan leaned against the counter. "How long have we been living like this?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. "A long time," she said finally. "Long enough that I stopped noticing when it started." He felt something settle in his chest. Heavy. Certain. "I don't want to be a stranger in my own house," he said. Eleanor looked at him carefully. "Then don't be." As her tone wasn't cruel, it was factual. Jonathan rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't even know what that looks like anymore." She walked to the sink and rinsed her mug. "It looks like being here," she said. "Not just physically." He watched the way her hands moved, efficient and calm. The same hands that once reached for him in the dark without hesitation. "Do you still want me here?" he asked. The question surprised him as much as it did her. Eleanor turned the water off slowly. "I want honesty." "That wasn't the question." She faced him. Her eyes were clear, steady. "I don't know," she said. "That's the honest answer." The words hung between them. Jonathan felt the instinct to argue, to convince, to promise. He stopped himself. "I found something last night," he said quietly. Her posture stiffened, just slightly. "The envelope," he continued. "I didn't open it." "I know. Why did you leave it there?" Eleanor walked back to the table and sat down, smoothing her sweater. "Because I needed you to see it before you read it." "And now?" "Now," she said, "I need you to decide whether you want to." Jonathan's pulse quickened. "Is it?" He stopped. "Is it bad?" Eleanor's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "It's true." He nodded slowly. She stood and walked past him, heading toward the hallway. "I'm going out for a bit," she said. "I need air." Jonathan turned. When will you be back?" She paused at the doorway. "I don't know." The front door closed softly behind her. Jonathan stood alone in the kitchen, the quiet pressing in again. His gaze drifted to the counter near the coffee machine. The envelope was back, placed neatly where he couldn't miss it. Jonathan stepped closer, his name staring back at him in Eleanor's careful handwriting. He reached for it, then stopped. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches against the window. Jonathan rested his hand on the counter instead, breathing slowly, realizing that whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just words on paper. It was the measure of how far they drifted and how much time he might already have lost. Jonathan didn't open the envelope, not that morning, not when the house went still again after Eleanor left. Not even when the coffee went cold and the sky outside shifted from grey to a dull winter blue. He carried it with him instead, from the kitchen to the office, from the office to the hallway, from the hallway back to the living room, like weight in a pocket you keep checking, even though you know it's there. The office door closed with a soft click behind him. This room had always made sense. Clean lines, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books he rarely read but liked to display, awards lined up with careful spacing, framed covers of business magazines with his name printed in bold letters. Jonathan Hale, visionary, leader, builder. He stood in the centre of it, envelope in hand, and felt oddly out of place. He set it down on the desk without opening it and looked around, seeing the room differently now, not as proof of accomplishment, but as evidence of time spent elsewhere. On the far shelf sat a photo he hadn't noticed in years. His daughter, Lily, at around 10. Front teeth missing, hair pulled back too tight. She was holding up a science fair ribbon and grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Jonathan frowned. He couldn't remember being there when that picture was taken. He walked closer and picked it up. The frame was dusty. That alone felt like an accusation. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his CFO. Market updates. A question about a call scheduled for later that afternoon. Jonathan stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then he turned the phone face down and slipped it back into his pocket. The silence that followed felt deliberate, uncomfortable, necessary. He sat at the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside were old notebooks, contracts, and a small stack of greeting cards bound with a ribbon. Eleanor must have tied herself. He hadn't looked at them in years. He untied the ribbon. Anniversary cards, birthday cards, notes written in Eleanor's handwriting, careful, warm, full of small observations he'd probably skimmed at the time. You worked so hard this year. I hope next year gives us more time. I know you're busy. I just wanted you to know we missed you tonight. She asked where you were. Jonathan swallowed. He flipped through them slowly, each one blurring into the next until the words started to form a pattern he couldn't ignore. She had been telling him all along, not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closing. Images surfaced without invitation. Lily standing on a stage in a blue graduation gown, scanning the crowd. Eleanor waving, phone raised, smiling too brightly. Jonathan watching from a hotel room, streaming the ceremony between meetings. A birthday dinner he joined late, cake already cut. Eleanor kissing his cheek, saying it was fine, always fine. A Christmas morning he missed entirely because of a delayed flight and a deal that couldn't wait. He'd believed that providing was the same as showing up. He'd been wrong. Jonathan opened his eyes and looked at the desk again. The envelope sat there, quiet and patient. He reached for it this time, then stopped. A sound drifted in from the hallway, the front door opening. Jonathan stood so fast the chair tipped slightly behind him. He walked out of the office and into the living room just as Eleanor stepped inside, scarf loosened, cheeks pink from the cold. She looked surprised to see him there. "You're still home," she said. "So are you," he replied. She gave a small nod, setting her keys down. "I didn't go far." They stood facing each other across the room, the Christmas tree lights still glowing faintly in the corner. "I didn't open it," he said. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward the office, then back to him. "I know. How?" "You're terrible at hiding things," she said. "You always have been." Jonathan almost smiled. "Almost." "I spent the morning in my office," he said, "looking at things." Her expression softened just a fraction. And realizing how much of my life happened without me," he said. Eleanor didn't respond right away. She slipped her coat off and hung it neatly by the door. "You can't change that," she said quietly. "I know." She looked at him then, really looked. "Do you?" "Yes," he said. "And that's what scares me." The words surprised both of them. Eleanor walked toward the kitchen, Jonathan following at a respectful distance. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "I don't have the energy for that." "That's worse," he said. She met his eyes. "It is." Jonathan took a breath. "When did you stop telling me?" Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass. "When I realized you already knew." The room felt smaller suddenly. "I want to be better," he said. "I just don't know how to prove it." Eleanor considered him. "Words won't do it." "I know. Neither will 1 week off," she added. He nodded. "I know." She set the glass down, then read the letter. Jonathan hesitated. What if it's final? Eleanor's voice was steady. Then it deserves to be heard. He looked toward the office, then back at her. Will you stay while I read it? She paused. Just long enough to matter. Yes, she said. I think you should. They went back into the office together. Jonathan sat at the desk. Eleanor stood near the window, arms folded loosely, looking out at the winter yard. He picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Jonathan slid his finger under the flap. Behind him, Eleanor didn't turn around. Outside, a car passed on the road, tires hissing against damp pavement. Jonathan unfolded the letter, and as his eyes moved to the first line, he felt something shift, quietly, irrevocably, inside his chest. Jonathan read the letter slowly, not because the words were difficult, but because each sentence felt like it carried weight he hadn't earned the right to rush through. Eleanor hadn't written it in anger. That was the first thing he noticed. There were no accusations, no lists of failures, no dramatic declarations, just honesty. I used to wait for you, it began, not just for you to come home, but for you to notice that I was waiting. Jonathan's grip tightened on the paper. Behind him, Eleanor stood near the window, arms folded loosely, her reflection faint in the glass. She didn't watch him read. She didn't need to. He kept going. I told myself that your work mattered because you mattered. That loving you meant understanding sacrifice. For a long time, that was true. His throat burned. He remembered those early years, small apartments, cheap furniture, Eleanor working late shifts while he chased impossible goals. They had been tired, but they had been together. Somewhere along the way, the letter continued, I stopped asking you to stay. Not because I stopped wanting you here, but because wanting began to hurt too much. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. That was it. Not one big betrayal, not one explosive argument, just the quiet erosion of hope. He opened his eyes and read on. I learned how to fill the space without you. I made dinners for one. I celebrated things quietly. I smiled when people said how lucky I was. The word lucky sat on the page like an accusation. Jonathan thought of the galas, the praise, the envy in other men's voices when they spoke his name. None of them had seen Eleanor eating alone at the kitchen table. I don't blame you for building what you built, the letter said. I blame myself for disappearing inside it. His chest tightened. The letter ended without a demand. Without an ultimatum, just one final line. I don't know if we can find our way back. I only know I can't keep living as if this is enough. Jonathan lowered the paper. The room felt too quiet, as if the house itself were holding its breath. He turned slowly in his chair. Eleanor was still by the window, looking out at the bare trees, her reflection layered over the winter yard. She looked calm, resolved. That's how you felt, he said, the words inadequate. That's how I lived. She replied. Jonathan stood, letter still in his hand. Why didn't you say something sooner? She finally turned toward him. Her expression wasn't defensive. It was tired. I did, she said, just not loudly. He swallowed. I didn't hear you. No, she agreed. You didn't. Jonathan stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to bridge the distance with touch. I thought if I kept everything running smoothly, he said, if I didn't complain, if I didn't make demands, you'd come back on your own. And when I didn't, he asked quietly, Eleanor's gaze held his. I stopped expecting you to. The truth landed with a dull finality. Jonathan nodded once. I'm here now. Yes, she said. You are. The way she said it made him realize that being present in the room was not the same as being present in her life. I don't want this to be the end, he said. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. I didn't write that letter to end things, she said. I wrote it so I wouldn't lose myself completely. That gave him a fragile, dangerous flicker of hope. But, she continued, hope without change is just another way of waiting. Jonathan exhaled slowly. Tell me what you need. She shook her head. No, he frowned. No? I spent years telling you what I needed, she said gently. That didn't work. So what now? He asked. Now, Eleanor said, I watch what you choose. The words settled between them. Jonathan felt the familiar instinct rise to promise, to outline a plan, to reassure her with certainty. He stopped himself. What if I fail? He asked instead. Eleanor considered him. Then we'll both know you tried. And if I don't, her voice was soft, then this ends. Not as a threat, as a fact. Jonathan nodded slowly. I have meetings this afternoon, he said. Calls I could take from home. Eleanor's expression didn't change. I cancelled them, he added. That made her look at him, not with relief, not with excitement, with careful attention. All of them? She asked. Yes. She searched his face as if looking for the familiar escape route behind his eyes. And tomorrow? She asked. Jonathan hesitated. Just a fraction too long. Eleanor noticed. I see, she said. No, he said quickly. I mean, I don't know yet, but I want to figure it out. She nodded. That's honest. The house creaked softly as the heat kicked on. Somewhere, a floorboard shifted. Ordinary sounds, ordinary moments, the kind they'd lost without noticing. Eleanor moved toward the door. I'm going to make lunch. Jonathan watched her leave the room, her steps unhurried. He looked down at the letter still in his hand, folded it carefully. This wasn't a crisis to solve. It was a life to relearn. And as he stood alone in the office, surrounded by proof of everything he'd built, Jonathan realized the truth he hadn't wanted to face. Winning her back wouldn't require a grand gesture. It would require a version of himself he wasn't yet sure he knew how to be. The suitcase appeared that afternoon, not dramatically, not in the middle of an argument. It stood quietly near the guest room door, half filled, one side zipped, the other open as if waiting for a final decision. Jonathan noticed it on his way back from the kitchen. He stopped walking. For a moment he told himself it was nothing. Eleanor travelled sometimes. She visited friends. She went to her sister's place when she needed space. But this felt different. The house felt different. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at the familiar blue case he'd bought her years ago at an airport shop in Boston. He remembered insisting it was durable, reliable, built to last. He wondered now how many things he'd said that about and been wrong. Eleanor was in the bedroom, folding clothes with methodical care. Each movement was calm, controlled, as if emotion had already passed through her and left behind resolve. Jonathan leaned against the doorframe. You're packing, he said. She didn't look up. Yes. For where? She slid a sweater into the suitcase, smoothing it flat. I'm staying with Marianne for a few days. A few days. Not forever, but not clearly temporary either. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. She paused, hands resting on the edge of the suitcase. You were on a call. Jonathan exhaled slowly. He had been. One he'd told himself was unavoidable, one that had pulled him back into the rhythm that felt safest. I could have waited, he said. Yes, she replied quietly. You could have. That landed harder than he expected. Jonathan stepped fully into the room. He noticed the details, the familiar dresser, the framed photo of Lily on the nightstand, the chair Eleanor used to read in, a room she'd made her own because she'd needed somewhere to belong. I thought we were trying, he said. We are, Eleanor said. That doesn't mean I stop protecting myself. He nodded, though the words stung. Is this because of the meeting? It's because of the pattern, she said gently. One day doesn't undo years. Jonathan watched her zip the suitcase closed. The sound was final, not absolute, but deliberate. Are you leaving because you think I won't change, he asked, or because you don't want to wait and see? Eleanor finally turned to face him. I'm leaving because I don't know which version of you I'll wake up to tomorrow, she said. The one who listens or the one who disappears. Jonathan swallowed. I don't want to lose you, he said. She studied him, searching for something she'd once trusted without effort. Then don't ask me to stay on hope alone. Silence stretched between them. Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't move. It buzzed again. Eleanor glanced at it, then back at him. She didn't say anything. Like she didn't need to. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. The CEO of his largest client, calling early, insistent. The old reflex surged, the familiar urgency, the feeling of being needed in a way that was clear and measurable. He looked at Eleanor. She stood still, hands folded, expression unreadable. Jonathan's thumb hovered over the screen. Accept, decline. The phone buzzed a third time, vibrating softly in his palm. Jonathan closed his eyes. When he opened them, Eleanor was watching him, not with expectation, but with something closer to acceptance, as if she was already preparing herself for the answer. Jonathan turned the phone face down and set it on the dresser. The call went unanswered. Eleanor's breath caught, just slightly. I'll drive you, Jonathan said. To Marianne's. She hesitated. You don't have to. I want to. She nodded once. All right. The drive was quiet. The winter sky hung low and grey, the roads damp from earlier rain. The radio stayed off. Jonathan kept both hands on the wheel. "I don't expect miracles," Eleanor said finally. "I expect consistency." "I know," he replied. She looked out the window. "I hope you do." They pulled up in front of Marianne's house, warm light glowing through the curtains, a place that felt lived in, safe. Jonathan stopped the car. He turned to Eleanor. "How long?" She met his eyes. "Long enough to see what you choose when I'm not watching," he nodded. "I'll be here." She opened the door, then paused. "Jonathan?" "Yes." "This isn't a test," she said. "It's a boundary." "I understand," he said. She stepped out, retrieving her suitcase from the trunk. Jonathan watched her walk up the path, shoulders straight, movements steady. She didn't look back. Jonathan waited until the door closed behind her before pulling away. The house felt emptier when he returned. Not because Eleanor wasn't there, but because this time he understood what her absence meant. He stood alone in the foyer, keys in hand, the quiet pressing in from every direction. For the first time, Jonathan realized that losing her wouldn't happen with shouting or slammed doors. It would happen quietly, one unanswered choice at a time. The house felt wrong without Eleanor, not empty exactly, just off balance, like a room where one piece of furniture has been moved and everything else hasn't adjusted yet. Jonathan noticed it in small ways, the quiet in the mornings, the untouched second mug by the coffee machine, the way the bed in the master bedroom remained perfectly made, unused, as if waiting for a decision no one wanted to name. He didn't go into his office that first day. That alone felt like rebellion. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop closed, staring out at the backyard where winter had stripped everything down to bare lines and muted colours. He stayed there longer than necessary, resisting the familiar pull to fill the time with productivity. His phone rang. He let it. Emails stacked up, missed calls followed, notifications blinked and faded. The world he'd built kept moving without him. That, more than anything, unsettled him. On the third day, he drove past Marianne's street. He didn't stop. He told himself Eleanor needed space, not surveillance. That showing up unannounced would only prove he still didn't understand the difference between intention and intrusion. So instead, he went home and cooked. It was a disaster. The smoke alarm went off twice. He burned one pan and undercooked another. He ate standing at the counter, grimacing through a meal that tasted like effort without experience. Still, he cleaned up afterward. That night, he slept in the master bedroom for the first time since Eleanor left. The room felt too large. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the house. For years, sleep had come easily, exhaustion always won. This time, it didn't. On the fourth morning, Jonathan cancelled a board meeting. Not postponed. Cancelled. The words felt heavy when he said them out loud, even heavier when he sent the email. He waited for the rush of panic, the spike of adrenaline that usually followed such decisions. It didn't come. Instead, there was only a strange calm. He spent the day doing ordinary things, grocery shopping, walking the neighborhood, fixing a cabinet hinge that had been loose for months. Each small act felt insignificant and strangely grounding, like he was relearning how to exist without an agenda. That evening, his phone buzzed with a message. "Eleanor, I stopped by the house today, just to pick up a few things." Jonathan read it twice. He typed back, erased the words, then typed again. "I wish I'd been there." The reply didn't come right away. He set the phone down and waited. Minutes passed. Then, "I saw the cabinet. You fixed it." Jonathan smiled despite himself. "It was bothering me." Another pause. "Eleanor." It always did. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. They weren't talking about cabinets. On the sixth day, Jonathan received an invitation to fly to San Francisco for an emergency negotiation. The kind of meeting that had once defined his worth, the kind he'd never refused. He stared at the email for a long time, then he forwarded it to his deputy with a short note. "Handle it." "I trust you." His finger hovered over the send button. Then he pressed it. The message disappeared from his outbox. Jonathan sat there heart pounding, not with fear, but with something close to relief. That evening, Eleanor called. He answered on the first ring. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he replied. Silence stretched, comfortable but cautious. "I wanted to let you know," she said. "I'm coming by tomorrow, just for dinner." Jonathan closed his eyes. "I'll be here." I know, she said. He heard the faint smile in her voice. The next night, Jonathan set the table. Not elaborately, just thoughtfully. He cooked again, this time with help from a recipe and patience he hadn't practiced in years. The food was edible. More than that, it was warm. When Eleanor arrived, she paused in the doorway. You stayed, she said. Yes. And you didn't tell me, she added. No, he said. I didn't want it to be a performance. She studied him, then stepped inside. They ate together in the kitchen, the same small table by the window. Conversation came slowly, but it came. After dinner, Eleanor stood to leave. Jonathan walked her to the door. I'm not asking you to come back yet, he said. I know, she replied. I just want you to know, he continued, that I'm learning how to stay even when it's uncomfortable. She looked at him for a long moment. That's the first time you've said that, she said. Jonathan nodded. It's the first time it's been true. Eleanor reached for the doorknob, then paused. This doesn't mean everything is fixed. She said, I know. It just means, she added, that I see you trying. She opened the door. Before stepping outside, she turned back once more. Don't stop, she said. The door closed gently behind her. Jonathan stood there alone again, but this time the quiet felt different. Not empty, intentional. He picked up his phone and looked at the missed calls, the unread messages, the demands waiting patiently for his attention. For the first time, he didn't feel owned by them. He set the phone down and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would ask him to choose again. And for the first time, he understood that love wasn't something he could win once and keep. It was something he had to show up for, every single day. Eleanor came home on a Sunday afternoon. No announcement, no suitcase this time, just her car in the driveway and the quiet sound of the front door opening. Jonathan was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands wet from washing vegetables. He looked up when he heard her keys on the counter. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked around slowly, as if she were seeing the house again for the first time. The small changes were subtle but unmistakable. The calendar on the fridge with handwritten notes, the repaired hinge on the cabinet, the absence of unopened mail stacked like a wall. You're cooking, she said. Yes, he replied. Dinner, not a strategy. That earned him a faint smile, the kind that didn't promise anything but didn't close the door either. She set her purse down. I didn't plan to stay long. I know, he said. You don't have to. She nodded, then moved closer, leaning against the counter, not beside him, not far away, somewhere in between. How was the week? She asked. Jonathan considered the question carefully. Uncomfortable, he said. Quiet, honest. That sounds new, she said. It is. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Eleanor washed, Jonathan chopped. Their movements weren't synchronized, but they didn't clash either. At one point, Jonathan reached for a towel at the same time she did. Their fingers brushed. This time, neither pulled away. Dinner was simple. Roasted vegetables, chicken, bread still warm from the oven. They sat at the small table, sunlight fading beyond the window. This used to be our favorite time of day, Eleanor said softly. I know, Jonathan replied. I forgot. No, she said. You postponed it. The distinction mattered. After dinner, Jonathan cleared the table while Eleanor stood by the window watching dusk settle over the yard. I got an offer this week, Jonathan said. Not looking at her, she turned. What kind? An expansion, he said. International, bigger than anything I've done so far. Eleanor waited. They want me to relocate, not permanently, but often, months at a time. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A tightening, a memory. And, she asked. Jonathan dried his hands slowly. I said no. The word hung in the air. Eleanor stared at him. You said no? Yes, just like that. No, he said honestly. It wasn't just like that. She studied him, searching for hesitation, for regret. What made you decide? She asked. Jonathan met her gaze. I finally understood what it was costing me. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not fragile. You're sure? She asked. Jonathan nodded. I'm choosing what stays. Eleanor exhaled slowly, as if releasing something she'd been carrying for years. She walked toward him, stopping close enough that he could feel her presence fully now. Not a memory, not a hope, a person. I don't need perfection, she said. I need consistency. I know, he replied. I won't promise what I can't give. She reached out, resting her hand lightly against his chest. The gesture was tentative, deliberate. Then let's start here, she said. Jonathan covered her hand with his own. Outside, the first evening lights flickered on. The house felt warm in a way it hadn't in years. Eleanor didn't say she was moving back in. Jonathan didn't ask. Some things didn't need to be rushed to be real. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, two people who had finally learned that wasn't proven by sacrifice alone, but by presence. And for the first time in a long while, Jonathan didn't feel like he was arriving late. He felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The new year didn't arrive with celebration for Jonathan. It arrived with routine, with mornings where he woke before the alarm and didn't reach for his phone, with coffee made for two, even when Eleanor wasn't there yet, with quiet that no longer felt like avoidance, but like space shared by choice. Eleanor returned gradually, first for dinner, then to stay the night, then to leave a book on the nightstand, a sweater on the chair, a plant by the window. Nothing was announced, nothing was negotiated. Jonathan learned not to ask for certainty. He learned how to wait without disappearing. One afternoon in early spring, Eleanor came home earlier than usual. Jonathan was in the yard, struggling with a hedge he'd ignored for years, sleeves rolled up, hands streaked with dirt. She watched him from the doorway. The man who once measured his days in deadlines and outcomes now argued silently with a stubborn branch. He looked focused, present, human. "That's not going to survive if you keep cutting like that," she said. Jonathan looked up and smiled. "Then I'll keep the failure." She set her bag down and stepped beside him, adjusted the angle of the shears, and cut cleanly. "You have to know where not to push," she said. "I'm learning," he replied. She handed the shears back and, without thinking, rested her head briefly against his shoulder. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. That night they ate late, talked about small things. A movie Eleanor wanted to see. A short trip Jonathan had climbed without regret. A call from Lily that started casually and lasted longer than either expected. As they cleaned up together, Jonathan realized something quietly significant. He wasn't waiting for the next important moment. He was living inside this one. Weeks later, Eleanor brought a box into the primary bedroom. It wasn't a move, it was a decision. Jonathan didn't comment. He simply made space in the closet. That night they slept together for the first time in years. Not urgently, not to reclaim lost time, carefully, respectfully, with the understanding that what they were rebuilding didn't need speed to be real. In April, Jonathan turned down another expansion. In May, he took time off without an agenda. In June, Eleanor laughed at one of his bad jokes, and he knew something essential had returned. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun went down, Eleanor spoke. "For a long time, I thought love ended all at once," she said, like a door slamming shut. Jonathan listened. "Now I know it wears away," she continued, "and it can be rebuilt, but only if both people are willing to stay when it's uncomfortable." Jonathan took her hand. "I left many times without ever walking out." "I know," she said softly, "and this time," he added, "I'm staying even when I don't know what to do." She looked at him steadily. "That's all I ever needed." Summer came quietly, with longer mornings, with shared meals, with Lily's visits, with a house that felt lived in again, not just maintained. Jonathan stopped measuring his days by results. He began measuring them by presence. One December evening, nearly a year after that silent night, Jonathan and Eleanor stood together in the kitchen again. The same small table, the same warm light, but not the same people. Eleanor hummed softly as she stirred something on the stove. The clock ticked without pressure. Outside, the garden lights glowed steadily. Jonathan paused, watching her. She looked up. "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Just thank you for staying." She set the spoon down and stepped into him, resting her forehead against his chest. "Thank you for learning how to come home on time," she said. Jonathan closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, success didn't feel fragile, because it no longer lived in numbers or recognition. It lived here, with her. And when the year ended again, there was no sudden revelation, only the quiet certainty that he had chosen well, that he had finally understood. Love isn't proven by what you build far away. It's proven by what you choose to tend, every day, at home.